the way that we know women and those in female bodies are more likely to be diagnosed with anxiety, depression, PTSD. And we know how psilocybin impacts those things. And we also know that, over the last 40 to 50 years, women's happiness has been on the decline. And so when we look at psilocybin's impact on mood, I hypothesized, well, yeah, women and people in female bodies are definitely going to see better benefits from microdosing.
Hello and welcome to Self Talk. I'm your host, Rachel Astarte. Today, my guest is Leslie Draffin. She's a certified psychedelic integration guide, somatic embodiment coach, and podcast host who's passionate about helping people embrace their bodies, cycles, sex, and psychedelics. She supports conscious souls who want to heal themselves through intentional microdosing, pleasure, womb reconnection, and somatic trauma recovery. She believes sacred earth medicine has the power to bring us home to ourselves, awaken our authenticity, and heal the trauma locked within our subconscious. So you can also find her podcast, which is called The Light Within, on your favorite podcast app, probably the very one that you're listening to this on now. So please make sure you go and check out The Light Within. Leslie, thank you so much for being on Self Talk.
Rachel, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be with you and to have this conversation.
Yeah, so we'll dive in. This is a topic. Earth medicine is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, and also to a lot of my listeners. So I really appreciate your insights that you're going to share with us today. But let's talk first about how you got where you are. What brought you to this path?
I love this question for a lot of different reasons. The shortest version is, I was raised deeply religious. My dad is a preacher in the deep South of the United States. And so very conservative. And for the majority of my life, I felt very disconnected from who I was as a woman, my feminine energy. And I had some big things happen. When I was 18, I was diagnosed with herpes right after my first sexual encounter, which just threw me deeper into shame, deeper into disconnection, and into an eating disorder I'd had for several years, which would then spawn alcohol abuse, Adderall abuse. And what was so interesting about my 20s, and really my whole life, I have been a very driven person. Lo and behold, it's because I have a wound around if I don't do enough, I won't be loved. And so I was highly successful in the television news industry. I was a news anchor for 15 years. And ultimately, when I turned 33, I had a spiritual awakening. I started to really uncover, my core wounds, some of the things that were unconscious blocks for me. And I started with like the gateway drugs of spirituality, which are crystals and meditation and tarot and astrology. And I was in therapy already, but it just didn't come together for me until I welcomed mushrooms into my life. It was early 22. I was struggling as a news anchor with anxiety and depression and PTSD on top of the things I was already going through, right? Based on my own past. And so I began intentionally microdosing with a wonderful coach named Bijou. And the medicine finally integrated the messages and the inner work I'd been doing with my therapist and my psychiatrist, and allowed me to walk through some pretty dark things. I ended up leaving my TV job that year, lost 2 of my 3 dogs that year, had a lot of grief, and an entire dark night of the soul where I was like, who the fuck am I if I'm not on television anymore? And months later, I felt the call to, learn more about medicine and get certified. So I went through about a 5 or 6 month certification with a company called Access Mundi, and then some trauma certifications. And this is where we are now. And I think it's because of where I was throughout my whole life, how disconnected I was, that I felt called to help other women specifically move through those things and get to the other side.
Mm. Yeah. Isn't it amazing how when you mentioned having a spiritual awakening, isn't it amazing how often when we awaken, one of the first things we do after we gather our shit together again is we want to help others.
Yeah. Yeah. It took me about 5 years from the spiritual, because it was 5 years ago that I had that awakening. And I think what was interesting is I felt for so long, even in the midst of that, um, uncovering that, like, oh, who am I? Who am I to be helping people? Because I didn't go to school for therapy, I didn't go to school for counseling. And now it's funny because it's something I've noticed. It's like sometimes people just need a little guidepost, someone to shine the light a little ahead of where they are now. And I often say, I'm likely not the person that's going to be your person forever, but for now, I think that's what we all need. It's certainly what I needed because I felt so alone when I first started this
Yeah.
healing.
Yeah. I see these so many healers popping up lately, and by lately I mean the last 20 years of my consciousness and doing this
Yeah.
kind of work. And what you said is so important. You don't need to know everything. You need to be able to help people, turn around and help people who may be a few steps behind you on the path. And that's a mitzvah, and that's why we do what we do. So in my work, I work with another college that's based in Arizona, uh, working with healers in training. And that's one of the things I say to them all the time is you don't have to know it all. You don't have to be, I'm not the best therapist in the world, but I can help some people. And if we're all doing that,
Yeah.
if we're all helping each other, that's the bodhisattva path, isn't it? We're all here to help lift each other.
Yeah. Hmm.
Beautiful. So I think that's a wonderful transition into talking about earth medicine,
Hmm.
and talking about mushrooms in particular.
Yeah.
What a blessing they are. Can we just say thank you to the spirit
Yes.
of the mushroom, and ask for the permission to speak about that openly. I wonder if you could talk about the difference between, say, doing a full psilocybin ceremony of 6 to 8 hours versus microdosing.
Yeah, of course. So what I find to be the biggest difference, obviously, other than the fact that when you're in a full ceremony, you're hallucinating, most likely, you're unable to go about your everyday life, is that microdosing fits so well into the everyday life. It's this wonderful medicine that allows us to continue being who we are and who we need to be, and often just at an elevated level. And so the nitty gritty is that a microdose is usually like point 1 to point 0.5 grams, 50, even as low as 50 milligrams to 500 milligrams, whereas a higher dose full ceremony could be 3 grams, 5 grams, 10 grams, depending on who you are.
That is a heroic
A
dose.
hugely heroic dose,
Yeah,
right?
right.
We're not recommending doing that without very well assisted guidance.
Yes.
But you're taking this tiny amount that um, I think a big misconception is that it's not going to feel like anything. There's
Mhm.
even, I think, a lot of folks in the microdosing community expert level who like to throw around the word subperceptual. But I don't think that self-aware women specifically um, feel nothing. I think that you really can feel tuned in, more alert, more present on a microdose.
Mhm.
And so those are, I guess, the biggest differences. Where with the ceremony, you're going to be gone for a while. You're going to be not there. And with microdosing, you're there, like really there. You're here. You're where you're supposed to be, and you're able to parent and work and drive and do everything that you need to do while also working with a medicine that can help you really do some a major healing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I So let's talk a little bit about that. You mentioned what a typical dose would be, but let's talk about what a microdosing week might look like. It's not
Sure.
something you do every day, correct?
Mm-mm. Correct. There are several different protocols out there, and a protocol is just the schedule with which you decide to take the medicine. And so some are 3 times a week, Some are 1 day with the medicine, 2 days off. There's a protocol that's 3 days on the medicine, 2 days off. And so there are a lot of different ways that you can work with this medicine. But like you said, you don't want to microdose daily for two major reasons. One is that the days where you aren't ingesting the medicine are some of the days where you can really see the benefits. And as humans, we have this tendency to think, oh, I'm only seeing these benefits because of this thing. And so that's why it's essential that we have these afterglow days, the time off the medicine. And the other thing is, you can become tolerant to the medicine. You can build a tolerance to the medicine where it would over time mean you need to take more and more to quote have these effects. But for me, again, it's that psychological dependency where we believe the only reason we're healing is because we're ingesting these mushrooms. And I think that's just not true. So that's why we take some time off. Now, I actually developed a protocol around the cycle because I began my career as a menstrual cycle coach. And it's where you would sit with medicine 1 day on, 2 days off in your first half of your cycle. So right after your bleed stops, which is inner spring or the follicular phase, past ovulation, which is inner summer, and then about a week and a half before your bleed begins, or when you're likely to start experiencing PMS symptoms, the grouchiness of the luteal phase, you would sit with medicine 3 days on, 2 days off. And so what that does is, one, it gives you more time with medicine closer to your period where you would likely have more cyclical challenges, and then more time off the medicine during times when your mood is already elevated. So you have that presence to really look at the afterglow days and see the benefits coming through for you.
Yeah, and so great. Thank you for that transition because I was about to ask. So that's an area of your specialty is working with women and healing and microdosing. And around a menstrual cycle, what do you notice, either for yourself or for your clients, what do you notice that shifts for them when they are microdosing in a cyclical way? Hi, it's Rachel here. If you'd like to dive deeper into your own self-development, but you're looking for an alternative to traditional talk therapy, I think you'll love the Foundation of Self Immersion program. For a full year, you'll get dynamic coursework you can complete on your own time, plus weekly coaching calls and monthly one-on-one sessions with me for personal support. Visit foundationofself.com and click on the events page for more information. That's foundationofself.com. Now, back to the episode.
Almost every person that I've worked with who has microdosed in a cyclical way has decreased pain significantly. And it's something that I almost hesitate to say because it's just so interesting, but I also can't prove that it's the medicine that does that. We know there are studies out there that show the beautiful impact of psilocybin on chronic pain. And so I believe that that's likely why we're seeing less cramps, but that's immediately one that comes to mind. The other one that I can much more like quantitatively judge is mood. People coming to me in session and saying, wow, I had this thing happen that would have triggered the shit out of me a month ago. And now I just feel like I can rise above it. I can respond versus react. And so fewer mood swings, fewer period cramps. I've had some folks who have elevated libido because they understand, their cycle better. That's the one part that we haven't really mentioned, but in my coaching, I do speak more about like, this is the seasons that you might feel like this and this. So there's a bit of cyclical coaching in there too, but elevated libido. And I think that happens because I really believe medicine, like mushrooms, creates self-intimacy, because when we know ourselves, we know what we want and we can ask for it because we feel more confident, and we can set boundaries if we need to and really ask for what we need, want, and desire, especially in loving partnered relationships. So there's some of the things: fewer cramps, fewer mood swings, better sex.
Yeah. Oh, all right. That's a good list. It's a good place to start.
Yeah.
So actually, that's a great question. Do you feel that that women benefit more or differently than other genders or sexes might by microdosing?
I want to say yes, like hell yes. And that's a hypothesis I created, about a year and a half ago, because I had looked at these studies and looked at the way that we're seeing chronic pain be impacted by psychedelic medicine, the way that we know women and those in female bodies are more likely to be diagnosed with anxiety, depression, PTSD. And we know how psilocybin impacts those things. And we also know that, over the last 40 to 50 years, women's happiness has been on the decline. And so when we look at psilocybin's impact on mood, I hypothesized, well, yeah, women and people in female bodies are definitely going to see better benefits from microdosing, whether they're doing it in a cyclical way or not. And I think what's also really interesting and what I've found, especially with the folks who find me, these are self-aware women who are doing their work. They're probably in therapy or have been at some point. Maybe they've taken medication. Maybe they've tried the spiritual tools of meditation and crystals and all of those things. And like, still something's not working, right? Maybe they're great at talking about their trauma like I was, but something is blocking them from actually moving through that aspect. Like I could tell you why I felt unworthy, but God, I couldn't make myself feel worthy until I welcomed in this medicine. And so I think that's why women benefit a lot, because I see them wanting to do the work and wanting to heal and wanting to evolve. And sometimes there's a block in that. And so when they come to the medicine, it's just like the door opens and they have this wonderful transition into the beneficial ways that medicine can really transform your life.
Yeah, beautiful. And that also leads us into the next question, which is one I think for any kind of medicine or any intentional work. What is the importance of setting an intention for doing this kind of work? Why is that such a big deal? So it would be one thing, for example, okay, you're depressed, here's some Prozac, pop the pill, Band-Aid, whatever. But we're talking about a nature medicine. And we're talking, and when we work with these medicines, there's the spirit of the medicine, which we invoked a bit at the beginning here. There is an interplay of the energy of this medicine and our own natures. So let's talk a little bit about intention and why that's so important in microdosing, even with microdosing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is like so essential. One thing that really pisses me off is when I hear folks like talk about the hacking and the it's very bro talk on the internet about like, how are we going to just like take this medicine to get what we fucking want? And I think that's the first thing, is to look at this in the spirit of reciprocity. Like, I really feel like this is a sentient being that was put here by the divine to help us understand who the fuck we are. I'm going to get emotional about this. I'm also about to have my period, so of course I'm emotional. Like it is this wonderful teacher that allows us to uncover parts of ourselves that we may have hidden, and really begin to live in our light in a lot of ways. And I think I have a conspiracy thought that like mushrooms want us to take better care of ourselves and the planet. So we take better care of them so then they can reach more people. Right. And so when we talk about intentionality and creating intentions around this work, one, it's to show reverence and respect, to say, I'm here, I'm open, and I trust whatever's going to come up. And two, I think that in any part of your life, whether it's microdosing or just like going for a walk, if we can get a little bit more present and more mindful in general and have an intention of something like, I take exquisite care of myself, is my current microdosing intention. It's something that we are seeing ourselves with love. We're welcoming in that compassion and that gratitude. And so I think that that's why intentions are so important. And when I first started, I thought intentions had to be like really like specific, and I thought they had to be like the perfect thing. And I would always stress, very much a like type A person here, I would stress about getting the perfect intention. And what I've said so many times is that the medicine's going to give you what you need, not necessarily what you want. So just be open. Being open is a great intention, because when you are going to go with the flow and surrender to the process, you'll get what you need.
Beautiful. So let's talk about trauma for a second. And psilocybin is such a beautiful guide, teacher, nurturer when it comes to working with trauma. Um, and so my experience, I have not done microdosing. I think I tried, but well, that's another story for another time. But I have done ceremony
Mhm.
and working with specific trauma, going in with the intention of here's some stuff I'm working on.
Mhm.
Help me, and just surrendering, right,
Yeah.
to that. So let's talk about the somatic processing and using psychedelics for somatic processing. How does that work in your practice, in your experience?
Right. So what I've noticed, and it kind of started with me, was I was becoming more and more aware through microdosing of what was happening in my own past, in my own ancestral lineage. Like I would have these guided moments where I would ingest the medicine and go into like a deep meditation and see myself in the womb and see these things that had happened, maybe even to my birth mother, and because I was adopted, and like have these aha moments. And then I would just feel so sticky and spicy in my body. And naturally, I would do things like breath or movement in some way. And that was early in my own walk with this medicine.
Mm.
After getting some additional training, because I saw this coming up with clients, and I felt like, oh shit, I need to know what to do with this. I studied with folks like Deb Dana and Pat Ogden, and I feel like the somatic element of psychedelic integration is essential and beautiful because we know that trauma gets stored in our body. And when we microdose, we become more present to how those sensations are coming up for us. And so we might think, oh, okay, just intuitively, I need to breathe right now, or I need to do like a stop motion, or I need to do a pull motion. It's hard to explain almost because it's like your body and the medicine become one. And sort of when you're present enough and slow enough to think, okay, I'm just going to allow this movement to come fluidly, it really does work. When I'm guiding clients, what we often do is I have them ingest their medicine and then come to session about 30 to 40 minutes later. And I'll notice within them, like, oh, I see your breathing is a little bit different now. Like, how do you want to move? What's coming up for you? I'll even guide them through certain body movements, like maybe we'll do a bit of dance or we'll do a bit of like undulating the spine. And I think that's sort of how it helps to process things. And again, because we know that this medicine really does open the door to our subconscious, sometimes you don't even know what the trauma was in there, and you don't have to. You don't have to know what it is. You'll just come to session and suddenly have like this pull. Like I had a client once and we were doing some breath work. I had her laying down and I do everything through Zoom. So I was watching her, and as she was breathing and we were listening to some music and I was doing a bit of guided imagery with her, she just like let this roar out of herself. And her whole body like came off of the bed, and it was like I could feel this shit breaking out of her heart. And she had had a history of sexual assault. And I was like, damn, I wonder if that's what that was.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's unexplainable. And I think this is an interesting aspect of the medicine. It's a mystery. I know it works. I sometimes have a hard time explaining exactly how, but I also don't think that the medicine needs me to know exactly how. It just needs me to trust.
Yeah, I think that's the case too, is as I use the word surrender, because it is a trust in I've set my intention, let the medicine do its work.
Yeah,
Yeah. So let's
100%.
shift, yeah, let's shift a little bit then into sexuality and psilocybin. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about how does psilocybin allow us to get back in touch with pleasure?
Mhm. Yeah, I think again, it has to do first with psilocybin's ability to get us present. Because if we're not present, we can't be experiencing pleasure, in my opinion. The worst thing that I feel like so many women specifically deal with is we get into the moment, maybe we're with our partner, and then in your head, you start to think about all the things you have to do, or you think about like a weird story your friend told you. And so microdosing, again, really helps you to focus in on what it is that you're experiencing in that moment. And so what I often do is I work one-on-one with people who then might take some of this home play into their partnered relationships. So I may suggest if there's someone coming to me specifically for either sexual trauma or wanting to just have better connected sex, okay, let's find a way that you can just start experiencing more pleasure. Period. Doesn't even have to be around your genitals. Can you go for a walk? Can you listen to the birds? Can you put your feet on the earth and see how that feels for you? Can you give yourself a massage and notice like how does that feel to touch yourself? And that's all. Like you're spend 5 minutes just giving yourself some touch. Then often what happens when they create what I call self-intimacy through the support of microdosing, they begin to know, wow, okay, well, this is what I like. This is what I don't like. This is what I would like more of versus what I would like less of. And they're also often journaling or often maybe sending me voice notes, getting really clear, thanks to the medicine, about what it is that they want to ask for. And so I think that it helps to build better relationships with their partner because communication is becoming more clear, is becoming more conscious, and they are doing the work to notice what it is that feels good for them so that when it comes time to meeting up for sex, you have a really good handle on what it is that you would like in that moment. And again, one thing that I've found super beneficial for me and my husband when I started this work is to microdose together and then play. And it was amazing. And he's not someone who really microdoses. He's had a lot of medicine experiences himself. And sometimes I would just microdose and then we would play. But it was this wonderful connective moment for us to come together again with that intention. And I think that's probably really important too, right? Is having that intention of experiencing more pleasure and more connectedness. And the medicine gave me that moment and is giving clients of mine that moment too.
Beautiful. Yeah, there's something too about that you talk about pleasure itself healing trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And on the face of it, I can see how that could be the case. How could it not? Pleasure is a wonderful thing. But is it not difficult to be in touch with pleasure, particularly sexual pleasure, if you have been sexually assaulted or have any kind of sexual abuse in your life? Isn't it hard to get in touch with that pleasure, to trust that pleasure, mm-hmm. to in order to heal it?
100%. And so the way I look at pleasure has very little to do with sex. I think maybe sensuality would be a better way to think of those things together. You know, when I work with clients who are experiencing exactly what you're talking about, they've had rape in the past, they've had sexual assault in the past, or molestation in the past. Going and telling them to microdose and masturbate is like the last thing I would ever do. It's how about microdosing and take a bath? Microdosing and eating a meal that makes you feel good and doing it slowly. How can we begin to rewire our brain's thought pattern around pleasure so that we're wired for it all over our body? So that once we really start to build a relationship with those senses, with our sensuality, we can become safer in our bodies, begin to trust our bodies a little bit better. And then eventually, maybe we do want to take it into a stimulation of the breast or stimulation of some place in the body that doesn't have fear attached to it or negative associations. Mm-hmm. That's definitely where I would start.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of what I mean, that pleasure heals trauma, because I think pleasure and sensuality allow us to learn to be a bit safer in our bodies. Because we're more present in the moment with ourselves. And we know that when we can get into that ventral state and we can become a little bit more anchored there, then hopefully if things do come up, even around sex, even while microdosing, you can find that link again. Okay, I know that this is safe to give myself a little, I almost said a cute little like snuggle right here on my upper chest. Is that safe for me? Okay, I can get back into that with my breath. I can get back into that with just sinking into myself. And so that if they did become elevated into one of the other states, they could pull themselves back into that anchor, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
absolutely. Absolutely. I, so now I'm putting my therapist hat on, right? So when there's trauma, especially, and I hear what you're saying because you said it earlier, and I appreciate you stressing pleasure is not always sexual pleasure. It can be just, kinesthetic pleasure. And it could be any kind of sensual pleasure.
Yeah.
And one of the obstacles to that is, do I deserve to feel good?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that psilocybin can do is help you to clear that path,
Yes.
that negative self-talk, that that patterning that has taught you you don't deserve this, because you are literally, ingesting that message, that the beauty that, as you said before, that mushrooms are here to teach us about connectedness, and we are part of that,
Mm-hmm.
right? We are part of everything. So, and I mean, that's my take on it. I would love to hear your thoughts about this. Does that ring true to you? Because there are people, at least in my practice, that I've encountered who, no matter how much work we're doing, there's still this pushback. It's like, yeah, I could do that. I can eat a meal. I can take a bath. I could take a walk. But I'm doing it because, yeah, I guess it feels okay, but they're not getting the resonance of, I just not just deserve this. This experience is mine to behold.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a thing I'm doing that in the moment feels good. But then when I'm done with my bath or my meal or my walk, I go back to feeling like crap.
Yeah.
Right. So the idea that psilocybin would also be able to help us find our place in the collective. Yeah.
Yep. No, I think well, I'll talk about one of the scientific ways that we know psilocybin works, and then I'll share a story of my own. So I
Yeah, I
think
love
one
I love
reason why,
science. So yeah,
yeah,
please share science.
yeah. So I think the reason why we're seeing folks work through blocks around things that you're speaking about, right? Like self-worth, self-love, when ingesting psilocybin is because of the way that it works in our brain to rewire our neural pathways. So when you're habit stacking, so you're doing things like giving yourself a massage or taking a bath and having that intention of I am worthy, over time with sitting with this medicine, that's going to get wired into your brain. That new neural pathway becomes fresh and it becomes something that, oh, okay, I do now think this. And I don't know the science behind like why the aha finally happens, but my own story, I kind of shared before, I got herpes at 18. And I was raised in the church. So I had that thought that if I had sex before marriage, something bad was going to happen to me and then I was unworthy. And look, it fucking did. And
Mhm.
so for my entire 20s and early 30s, through multiple relationships, I had a failed marriage in my 20s and now I'm in a super supportive marriage. Even in my super supportive marriage now, I had such a hang up around receiving oral sex. I didn't think I was worthy of it. I thought that made like because I had herpes that I was dirty. And so that was such a block to pleasure for me. And when I began to sit with medicine, that was my first intention was to become more open to receiving pleasure. Now, what the medicine heard is that I needed to become more open to receiving. So we worked on that for a whole fucking year. And finally, last year in 23, I like was on a walk and I thought, wait, is this what it is to love myself? Like, hold on. I kind of like myself a lot right now. Oh shit. Am I worthy now? I'm like, "Oh my God, you are." It just happened. It was this weird light bulb aha. And what I believe happened at that point is I had been doing so much work to rewire those neural pathways, to quiet that default mode network in the brain that really is responsible for our patterns, our like self-limiting belief talk, the things that we like are running in our head a lot, that hamster wheel of oftentimes shitty self-speak had somehow gotten like a chink in its chain and like we went a different way. And
Yeah.
it just fucking happened. And I had been sitting with medicine at that point on and off for over a year. So it's one of those things where I chalk it up to being the mystical. Like I know that the science does support this, but I also know that if we try to let science explain everything, like we forget the mystery that is all of the universe and all of consciousness itself. And so I believe, yeah, that sometimes that aha moment happens when you're walking down the road. You suddenly realize, like, damn, this is where we are now.
Yeah. And science and spirituality are having a lovely courtship right now, which I greatly appreciate. And I'm really pushing for them to finally make it official.
Yeah.
You know? And so, yeah, I agree with you. It's yes, there's the science aspect of it. Yes, there's the mystical aspect of it. And that's what science is right. How do we explain the things that we can't explain? And do we need to explain everything scientifically?
Mm-hmm.
There is always mystery.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, let that be,
Yeah.
beautiful. I love this. This is so helpful. And unfortunately, that's our time for this episode.
Yeah.
But Leslie, how can people find you?
Sure. So you can find me on Instagram. I'd love to send you a link to put in the show notes. And if you're listening to this and you think, wow, there's hope for me too, or you're interested in inviting this medicine into your life, I'd love to invite you to book a free call with me and one, see if you're the right candidate for this type of medicine, because we didn't really speak about it, but there are some folks that might not be aligned, and we can talk about that. And also to see if we're a good fit. I mentioned in passing, one of the clients that I've worked with, we'll call her T. She booked her discovery call with me after her dad passed away. She was already in therapy to work through that grief. Her sexual assault trauma had been coming up. And so when we were working together in this microdosing capacity, she was really able to uncover some subconscious beliefs that were really keeping her in that unworthiness, move through that, set her own boundaries, become a better single mom. And it was life-changing work for her and for me. So if you would like to set up a call, I can put a link in the show notes maybe as well, or head over to Instagram and just DM me the word hope, because there is hope and I would love to meet you.
Beautiful. And yes, I will have all of the links in the show notes so that people can reach you. Leslie Draffin, thank you so much for being on Self Talk today.
Thanks, Rachel.
Hi, this is Rachel Astarte from the Self Talk podcast. I'd love for you to send me your emails with questions or stories about yourself. What are you looking for? What are your questions? What are you grappling with in your own personal life that has to do with your identity, with yourself, with your very existence? These are the things that we're going to talk about during the podcast. And go ahead. It's all right. Get deep. I can handle it. So send them to Rachel@selftalkpodcast.com. And I'll see you on the next episode.